is Rebecca Schissel Marshall with Whole Body Upgrade, a podcast to help you get unstuck, feel better, and have more energy. Let's get started.
Episode 54, The Games Your Mind Plays. I want to begin by welcoming in the directions, the great direction of the east, the south, the west, and the north, the direction that is above and the direction that is below and the direction that is within. I welcome in all the helping, compassionate spirits that have been here to help us, that have volunteered to help us in this lifetime. And I welcome in the ancestors who have lived well and died well. Maybe it even goes back thousands of years in our lineage to find them, but they are there and they're here to support us. I welcome all of the guides that are here to connect us so that whatever needs to be said will be said and whatever needs to be heard will be heard. And I acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Creek and the Cherokee in what is now known as Athens, Georgia. So hello, my friends. How are you? It's full swing of summer here. The garden is growing, there's swimming happening, and I have been really trying to take things at a slower pace, very purposefully. Summer is, for me, one of the most challenging seasons. It's typically very challenging for me. I have more difficulty in the summer and have for many years of my life. More difficulty with my health, more difficulty with emotions and my mind. It's been really a reoccurring pattern for years, and I've had varying degrees of success in dealing with the challenges. And that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about today is not just the season of summer, but this is something that I often see with a lot of my clients. Part of this is because of the games the mind plays. And so I wanted to talk about those games that the mind plays with us most of the time, right? The mind has this, once you watch it, the mind has this little pattern that it'll do, and it's pretty consistent across people. The content is different, but the patterning is very similar. What my experience is that the mind is very tricky. And this is something, one of my teachers, my guru is Swami Satchidananda, and he would say that the mind is very tricky. You have to watch that. You have to follow that. And in my viewpoint, I blend a lot of different traditions. I blend the yogic tradition, and particularly the integral yoga tradition and the Buddhist tradition that I was trained in the awareness practice. And in my viewpoint, the ego is doing the best it can to survive, right? The ego wants to survive. This part of us that is really clinging to this materialistic life, right? And survival of the ego typically means that it wants to keep you miserable. That's how the ego survives. If you are without ego, you don't have to be worried about all of this. Should I do this? Should I do that? Right? It all just changes. It sounds funny and it's very counterintuitive, in fact, but the ego is actually the place of suffering, and the ego feeds off of suffering. So the mind plays these little sneaky games to maintain the ego. I'll give you an example. Let's say you've been trying to shift the foods that you've been even eating to ones that are more anti-inflammatory to maybe decrease your pain and the unstable moods that you've been having. And you have a trip, right? It's summer. You're planning for an upcoming trip. The mind might say, no problem. I can do that when I'm on the trip, right? That might be one thing it said. It could also say, no way am I going to do that. Throw it out the door. But let's say it says, no problem. I can do that. Which is true. You can, right? It's not lying. It is true. And when you show up at the place that you're renting or the hotel, right? it might prove to be a bit more challenging than what the mind convinced you it was. So then you might hear your mind say, well, this is too hard. I'm hungry, and there's just not a place that I can eat that has anti-inflammatory food. Everything's fried. So I might as well just eat at this place. I might as well just give up. It might even go that far. So that seems like a circumstance. Like, well, I was on vacation and there just wasn't any place to eat, right? It seems like there's no other option except eating that fried food. Now, here's the game. This is when it gets really interesting, when you start to see this, the mind games that it will play. Then you get home after your time away, whether it's a weekend or a week or however long you're gone, and the mind says, I can't believe you ate that. You were supposed to be eating better food. What is wrong with you? And then you might feel those emotions that come up. It might be shame, it might be sadness or disappointment, right? All that is part of the game. So let's go back to the supposed circumstance, right? The ego, or as one of my teachers calls it, egocentric karmic conditioning self-hate. That's the author, Sherry Huber. She's amazing. If you haven't read any of her books, she's fantastic. Egocentric karmic conditioning self-hate has created this thought that it will be easy, that it's fine. We can do this. And then when it's not, it gets to beat you up. It gets to be really harsh with you. It gets to be really mean and keep you miserable, which, remember, if we go back to what we said before, that's kind of what it wants to do, right? So there are these two sides of the coin. You can do it. It'll be fine. You don't have to worry about it. And then I can't believe that, right? It goes back to what we talked about desserts, right? You should have that dessert. Oh, it looks so good. You deserve it. It's a treat. I can't believe you ate the dessert. Yeah? So it's a cycle that when you get really curious and watch with this deep listening that I talk about, this deep awareness, you can start to see this pattern play out over and over again, whether it's food, whether it's the trip somewhere, right? All of that is where you can see this pattern playing out. Now, you might be thinking, this seems pretty crappy, right? I mean, it's the human experience and it's just what happens. And there are ways that we can navigate this. There are ways that we can take a little responsibility for this. So when you begin to watch and you become the observer, you can get really good at seeing this pattern, really good at seeing this pattern. And what happens is when you see this pattern, like, oh yeah, there's the brain doing that again, it gives you this teeny tiny little distance, this 1/4 of a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch, or maybe you have a whole inch separation from that voice that says, you should have the cake. You should just go ahead and eat out. This is too hard, right? And you can start to not take it personally. It's nothing wrong with you. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's the brain. This is just what the brain does. When you see the pattern over and over again, you begin to see what is happening. And you can say, brain, I'm on to you, right? That little critical voice that talks in those two places of, you shouldn't do this, and then beats you up on the other side of it. Great. So now you've been watching the mind and maybe you know the pattern. Maybe you're familiar with this pattern. Oh yeah, it says, you can watch a little TV. You can do that. And then 3 hours later, it says, I can't believe you watched that much TV, right? You might be like, well, okay, Rebecca, now what? My brain is crazy. What do I do when my mind plays these games? And that's what we're here to talk about today, right? So watching how the brain does that. And then you get one step in front of it, When you have watched the pattern, when you see that pattern, you've been watching the brain, what it does and it says, and you have an idea of this pattern, now you know what the next play is in the playbook. And that is super useful. Okay, my brain says this, I do this, and then it does this, right? So let's go back to that example, the first example. You have this new food plan and you're trying to follow it, and you know in your heart it's what you want. You know you want to care for yourself. You know you want to nurture yourself, right? That was very clear. And you're going out of town. And the brain says, no problem, I can do this. And then you remember what happened last time. Or you think, oh yeah, Rebecca said, this is how it's going to be, or this is how it was in the past, right? Then you can start to plan. Oh yeah, I remember, like it's always hard getting food. It's always a struggle to figure out where everybody wants to eat when we're hungry and it's 6:00, right? So you can begin to plan ahead for what you want, what you think is really important, so that you can follow through on that, right? So that you can do the thing that you know you really want to do. So for me, I have 2 kids. We have lots of food allergies and food restrictions that happen in our family. My husband will get very sick if he eats anything that he's intolerant of. Not really ideal. So we have a very strict regimen of why we need to do that. For me, I can fudge. I just don't feel as well. And I've chosen that that's really important to me, is to feel well and enjoy my vacation. So I also know eating a certain way is hard when the kids are yelling and screaming and hungry and melting down because we're not in our space. So if I have a plan in place, when we go on this vacation, or, okay, this is the restaurant of where we're going to go, or we have food with us. I know we're going to do this for dinner. We're in an Airbnb or a VRBO, and we're going to make dinner, and I have the stuff with me. Then I can preempt the yelling before we all get super hungry, myself included, right? I have picked out a place. I know we're going to crash by 6 p.m. I know that I will start making poor decisions after that. And if I plan ahead, and I've maybe done a little research before we even go of like, well, what restaurants are in that place that are gluten-free? What restaurants do have vegan options? Then I might, and maybe I just pick out a couple. Like I don't even have to decide like, okay, if we're staying in this location, I have 4 restaurants that I've picked out that we can choose over the course of a week or 2. Or I have the food that I know I'm going to cook. Then things seem to just go more easily. They're less bumpy. It's kind of like an investment, right? You might have to put a little investment before the fact, but the payoff is really amazing. So I was just recently encouraging a client to show up, to think about this, how she would show up with her family and to help her family with recipes and to offer to help them with meal prep. When we went through some of the potential scenarios of what might happen if her family decided to veer from this plan or wanted to eat a tub of ice cream or have a drink, it didn't mean that she had to follow. So she had that in the forefront of her mind, just the thought of, well, if they aren't going to stick on this, I am. And she made a plan of what she could say. Oh, that's okay if you want to do that, right? It's all right. You don't have to force everybody to do what you need to do. But here's what I need to do to take care of myself. So she could eat what felt good to her body. We talked about how she could continue to meditate, right? It could be about meditation too. And to make a plan for when she was there of how she would meditate, where she would meditate, when she would be able to, do the things that supported her. Meditation, moving her body, eating the food that supported her. Those are all plans that we put into place before she is going on this very long trip with her family. Now, if the plan doesn't work, if you need to change, like, I thought I could, meditate in the morning before I got up and left the room, that's okay. It's totally fine if plans change. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be rigid. But if you have a plan and you say, well, that didn't work, what else could I do, right? You've kind of got a placeholder there. And it's much more likely to happen. You're much more likely to succeed when an initial plan is in place. When you think about the objections that might come up, when you think about the scenarios, you have that plan. And then you're ready. This can go for emotions too, right? It's not just about meditation. It's not just about food. When you go to visit family, or if you're going on a vacation with even the family that you love very dearly, and you're in an enclosed, smaller space like a car or a plane for a longer amount of time, you might notice that certain emotions arise, certain things come up from your past. Preparing yourself for how you want to respond, what you need to do to take care of yourself. All of that is really important if you're thinking like, oh yeah, usually I get really grumpy by about the third day. I wonder why, right? You can get really curious. You can ask, why is that? If you know you're going to be spending lots of time with family in that really tight space, you might plan for intentional time out, like walks, by yourself around the block, or just even quiet reading time. Or I know I need that 5 minutes to just read an inspiring book or listen to a podcast, right? The mind will tell you all sorts of stories. The mind will tell you that you should spend as much time as possible with your family, or that you should want to be with them, right? That's just the mind. That's just the mind playing games. But what you know is that the mind plays these games, and that you don't have to listen to that voice. You don't have to listen to that. You can know these are the things that take care of me. I know I can miss one day of meditation, but if I miss 2 or 3, things start to go off track. So when you want something to happen, make a realistic plan, right? Meditating for 3 hours a day while you're away with family is probably not going to be realistic. So thinking about, well, what's a realistic plan for my food that feels good to me and that might work in the situation that I'm going into? Or for your emotions, what's a good emotional plan? If I know, I just need to do these self-care activities in order to take care of myself. That will take care of me emotionally. I need to be able to talk to my friend once a day, right? What is it that is your plan that you know really helps you? When we make a compassionate decision for what we want for ourselves, when we make a compassionate decision, right? That's that key place. We're compassionately knowing it's not like this, I have to eat this. It doesn't come from that place. It comes from a very compassionate place of, I know what I need, and I'm willing to take care of myself. It's so important to back up that heartfelt decision and make a plan. Make a plan for your emotions. Make a plan for your food. Make a plan for your movement. It's really the process of showing up for yourself with compassionate self-discipline. And that, my friends, makes a world of difference when you are willing to show up for yourself and show up for what really matters for you. Okay, sweet friends, I would love to hear about what you are doing to support yourself and your plan for making it happen. If you need support in making that plan and figuring out what does feel good for you, for finding that compassionate self-discipline, you can reach out to me. I have a free call called a Vibrant Health Chat, and I'll put the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Take good care of yourself.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Whole Body Upgrade. If you'd like to learn more about working with me, you can visit me on Facebook or Instagram, or on my website, CenteredYou, that's CenteredYou.com. See you on the next episode of Whole Body Upgrade.